And welcome to Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Hi, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing good. As a matter of fact, I'm doing really good. Well, sort of good and sort of not good.
Oh,
Today is the first day of my spring break.
okay.
I'm out for a little over a week from school, so which is good.
That's
But
good.
but I started my spring break yesterday, finding out that I have a raccoon in my fireplace.
I
So
saw you post on Facebook
yeah,
about that.
it
Is Rocky the raccoon still there?
yeah, as far as I know, I had a friend come by yesterday, a teacher friend of mine who's handy, and he came by and climbed up on the roof and looked down the chimney and took some video with his phone. Said, "Yep, there it is." So we threw something, we threw a rope down there, thinking maybe it'll climb
Yeah,
out
the crowd.
eventually. But but anyway, well, that's something that we'll have to deal with, I guess. We don't use that fireplace. We hadn't used it in years,
Yeah,
and they say that this time of year, they try to find them that hadn't been used. And
yeah.
the good thing about it is it looks pretty clean. I mean, from the video we saw, so it looks like it's in good shape. But
But
anyway, that's life, isn't it?
it is absolutely.
All
You
right.
it'll work itself out.
It will. Well, go ahead, Ray. Introduce our guest today.
We've got Mark Griffith with us today. I'm really glad to have him here. I got to know Mark, it's some years ago now, Mark, on the Housing Hour when he invited me to come and be a guest there, and I enjoyed that. And I found out that he had some history that I didn't know anything about that was prior to Oak Ridge. And the book that he has, it's an ebook that's available online that you can get for free. It's called Murder Will Out. And we'll let Mark explain to you where that murder will out phrase came from. That's an interesting story, Mark, in and of itself. But we're glad to have you with us this morning, and we look forward to learning about some unique history that happened right near where Robertsville School is today, Robertsville Middle School, just up the hill, a little ways from there. So tell us about Murder Will Out.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me. It's a great honor to be on this show. Keith, your oral history is well known in the community. Your work there has been phenomenal. And Ray, I call you the Shelby Foote of East Tennessee, and
Oh,
you've got you've got that gift of storytelling that is just fun to listen to. I'll tell you
thank
that.
you. Appreciate it.
But yeah, so this ebook, you mentioned the Housing Hour. Keith, you were on the Housing Hour. You
I
came out
was.
with us. Kevin Ray,
Mhm.
who really, Kevin and I worked on the website and blog on our website. So I was doing content for blogs that was posting on the Housing Hour for community type of information, fun things and historical things.
Mhm.
Kevin and his mother, Chrissy Ray. Chrissy is co-president of Mortgage Investors Group and from Oak Ridge. And Kevin, of course, was born and raised in Oak Ridge. So Kevin, they helped me and encouraged me to go out and find interesting stories that we could write on the blog. And I was working on the pool. It was the 75th anniversary of the pool. And Emory Road that runs right by the pool.
Yeah.
You're responsible for having the plaque on the turnpike that points to the Pillar Bridge, which is right there at the practice field of Oak Ridge High School.
Mhm.
So, but Keith, it all started with you. I've had a lot of people help me with this story to unlock it. Ray introduced me to a ton of people: Dennis Eggert, Leo York,
Yeah.
Fred Eller, Don Bell. All of these folks helped me sort out this history because what happened with any type when the government comes in, the continuity of history got wiped out pretty much. So when you come in and create a secret city like Oak Ridge was, all the history before it kind of left with the people. So
Right.
your oral histories are so important to that end. Well, I was in the oral history site going through. That's where I live. I mean, I love reading the details of the Oak Ridgers, these guys that were, that made Manhattan Project what it is. But I was going through that, and I was searching for the pool. So I was just doing word searches, right, in the oral histories for pool, and I came across several oral histories, but one was this James Brannon. I don't know if you remember the interview.
You know, I don't, you know, I did over 400 of them. So
Yeah.
it's hard, and I'm old now, so it's hard for me to remember.
Well, let me
But I mean, I
remind you.
recognize the name. I do
Well, let
recognize.
me remind you of this one. So when you were interviewing him, he was telling you about the details of his life in the Manhattan Project, but he kept on saying, "But there's a story that happened in the 20s. There was a murder I got to tell you about." And you'd say, "Well, wait 1 second. Let's continue with the Manhattan side, and we'll get to that." And he would talk a little bit more. You'd interview a little bit more, and then he'd come back. "Can I tell it now? Can I tell it now?" And he said, "Well, look, we'll get to that 1 second." And it went on for a couple of times like that. And finally, at the end, he says, can I tell the story now? You go, and you said, "Yes, now is a good time for you to tell this story." And he said, "Well, there was 4 guys and they committed a murder right here, in Oak Ridge, in pre-Oak Ridge, that type of thing." And so that's how that unfolded. But he had the details wrong, some of it right, but most of it wrong. But as I was doing the story for the pool, I've read, hey, that sounds interesting. I need to go back and revisit that and find out 4 guys committing murder? That doesn't sound right. And then in the interview, he said, yes, and they were hung in Clinton, Tennessee. I said, and you narrowed down the year. He said, in the 20s, 23, 24. And I was thinking to myself, no, Clinton wouldn't have hung anybody in the 20s. They did in the 1800s. All communities might have had a gallows, but I don't think Clinton did. So I put that on the back burner, finished the story in the pool, then went back to it. And a quick Google search, I discovered I just said 4 guys executed on the same day in Anderson County, Tennessee. Bam, pulled it up, found the names immediately. And I was able to go and get the Supreme Court records. The court records of the case in Clinton, and it was tried in Clinton, were destroyed when the courthouse had some water damage and water issues, and a lot of records were destroyed. But anyway, that's what started it, Keith. It was your history. So,
wow. And I mean, I remember that story. I don't remember where I heard it, but I do remember that being told that story.
Yeah, and a lot of people have the story. And what's interesting is in the final verdict of these 4 men, the Attorney General said that this story is going to last for over 100 years because it was so dynamic. Mm-hmm. However, it didn't last for 100 years. Everybody forgot about it in 20 years. And I finally kind of figured out, well, it's because they knew the answer to the murder that occurred in this series. So once you figure out a crime, it kind of gets buried in history and is not remembered. It's only the ones that are unsolved that seem to stay the test of time, like Jack the Ripper, so anyway.
Or JFK.
Or JFK, exactly. Yes. Yeah, so those are the types of things that survive the time. But this story goes back to 1921, and it starts in Knoxville, Tennessee. Interesting enough. The whole basis of this was a bank robbery. That was the conspiracy. These 4 men that are behind me, you can see them. These 4 men, and behind them, the 5th guy standing there, he was Sheriff Roberts from Anderson County and Roane County. He kind of had dual hats back then, but he was from Harriman. He's the one that finally made the arrest of these guys. But those 4 guys, you see the little one there, the shortest one, his name is Charles Petrie. Next to him is John McClure. Charles Petrie's from Anderson County. He has a connection to Anderson County, not sure where he's from. John McClure, he's from Boston. Next to him is Otto Stevens. he's from Oakdale, and Tom Christmas is from Harriman. Oakdale was the subject of the conspiracy. These guys were plotting to rob a bank in Oakdale, Tennessee. That was what this was all about. They were figuring to go down there because Otto Stevens was from Oakdale, so he knew that there was a bank. He knew the town well, and he knew the layout. So he knew that it's a railroad town, and they have a lot of money there because it's like a hub, a railroad hub. So there's a lot of railroad workers. So he knew there was a lot of money in that bank. So that's what they're planning to do. Now, this was a sensational story that hit national press all over the place. I've got headlines in my ebook, and I do have a QR code that we can show that if people want to shoot it and download the book. Actually, they can reach out to me at Mortgage Investors Group. And Ray, I think you have the PDF file too that you can email out.
Yes.
But it was a sensational story. It was headlines. Everybody, and I often ask myself, why was it so sensational? It's just a bank robbery. Now, there was a murder that was committed in this. But we've had murders and bank robberies before. We had, the Jesse James gangs in the 1880s. We had Dalton gangs. But why was this one so special? But one of the contexts of history is Knoxville at the time was going through this growth period where there was a real social integration, social continuity in the society, but it was still had the rough edges of the Wild West. And, just a few years before, we had Kid Curry come into town in Knoxville and shoot up the town and shoot one of our Knoxville police officers by the name of Dinwiddie. That occurred in like 1901. So there was rough edges around Knoxville during that period of time, but it was transitioning into more of a normalized society. And in this one, the Dalton gang, for example, was doing bank robberies. Their last bank robbery was 1921. This crime occurred in 1921, April of 1921. The Dalton gang rode into a town on horses. These four guys stole a taxi. There were many bank robberies where there were somebody would steal a car to commit the bank robbery. It was still in that transition period where horses were used to ride into town and shoot them up. The Dalton gang got shot up in 1921. And so I think this transition period occurred where they're thinking, hey, we can use automobiles for our escape and not horses. So that's what these guys did. They strategized. They were living in Clinton, interesting enough, in a what do you call it, boarding house. And they planned what they would do is send two of the guys, Charles Petrie and John McClure, into Knoxville to the Southern Depot station outside on Depot Street, where all the trains would come, but there was a taxi stand there. And they figured that what they needed was the biggest, fastest vehicle that was made in 1921. Not many cars fit that description. They're all 4 cylinders, the Model A's, whatever you would call it, all low cylinders and thin tires, not good for escape or going in. These guys realized, hey, we need a big car. So they went after, they saw one coming up in the taxi stand called the Chandler 6 circling through every now and again. And the Chandler 6 was 6-cylinder engine, big tires. So they realized on these back roads that were still quite questionable, we can make our escape. So we'll just hire that taxi cab, take them out into Clinton, into the country, and then steal the taxi, and then take it on into Oakdale and commit the bank robbery. So this crime was never going to be a carjacking with a murder. That was never the intention. But what happened was they took the taxi from it to Charles Petrie and John McClure got into the taxi, and Andrew Crumley was a taxi cab driver. And they told him that they want to hire him to go to Clinton. Said, okay, he quoted him the fare that would be to Clinton. This was about 6 o'clock in the afternoon in April of 1921. And said, I want you to drive me out to Clinton. and then just drive us out into the country. And Andrew Crumley said, wait, that's no destination out into the country. It's like, wait, in the country, what are you talking about? I don't want to drive. You all up to something bad? You all up to illegal activity? You got a moonshine still in there? That's what Andrew was thinking. Now, going back into time, in 1921, do you know what a big piece of history was going on in the United States at that time? Prohibition.
Prohibition, yeah.
Prohibition, illegal moonshine, illegal hooch, black market, all of this stuff was going on. So Andrew Crumley thought, oh, this is illegal activity. I'm not going to have any part of it. They could arrest him. They could take his taxi and they can fine him. I think it was $5,000 for doing that. So he said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'll take you to claim, but that's it. And they convinced, no, this is all innocent. We're not going to do it. I don't know what they said. They convinced him to do it. But Andrew knew at 6 o'clock in the evening, going out to Clinton, this is going to take some time. By the time he returns, it's going to be dark. So he says, well, look, I'm going to go over to my boarding house that's right on State Street in downtown Knoxville and pick up a friend to help me see the roads at night. So when I come back after I drop you guys off, I'll have some help to do the roads because it was dark on those roads. Roads were bad. Once you got passed out of Knoxville. So that's what they did. Picked up, went up to this boarding house, and Andrew Crumley said, that dropped.
Yeah, your video dropped out, Laura.
I don't know why.
I don't either.
I'm showing connected here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we'll still hear you.
Okay. Hopefully it'll pop back up.
Okay.
But he went to the boarding house and was going up to the porch where everybody was sitting and was talking to a friend about, would you drive out with me to Clinton? I've got this fare here. And what happened was a man by the name of George Lewis heard this and said, hey, look, I've got family that lives in Clinton. Can I go with you? And so they said, yes, that would be good. So George Lewis, Andrew Crumley got into the taxi of this big sedan, Chandler 6 with big, thick wheels with Charles Petrie and John McClure. And they went to Clinton and drove. And they got out there an hour or so later into the evening and stopped in Clinton. And
there you go.
And gave me the code. And stopped in Clinton. And then 2 more guys come out of the place to get into the car. And Andrew Crumley is saying, hey, wait. Where'd these 2 guys come from? You never mentioned anything. And they were holding 2 little satchel bags. And he said, what's in those bags? You got burglary tools? Is this what we're doing? Am I going to drive you out to the country and you're going to do some type of crime? I don't want to be a part of this. And they all assured him, no. You're just going to drive us from Clinton out into the country. Now, into the country was down State Highway 61. And that ran through what present-day Oak Ridge Turnpike is. But so that's where they were headed, into the country, because they were on their way to Oakdale. So they got in the car and they started heading down the pike. George Lewis was supposed to get out and go to Clinton to see his family members, but he knew something was not right. And he didn't want to leave Andrew Crumley alone with these 4 guys sitting in the back seat. George Lewis, being a good guy, stayed with him. And so they rode into down State Highway 61. Now, present day, that state highway has been changed. 61 goes around Marlow to Oliver Springs. That's because the Manhattan Project recognized that we couldn't have a state highway running through a secret city. That wasn't proper at all. So they redirected that one. But back in the day, before Oak Ridge, Highway 61 came down, which is the Oak Ridge Turnpike as we know it today. And they drove right through where the Oak Ridge High School football practice field is to Pillar Bridge. And the road went back behind the community center, right near Grove Center, and went up where Illinois Avenue is today. But it wasn't the same path because Oak Ridge kind of worked that out. But the Oak Ridge path that they took was right there at Hilltop. There's an apartment complex right there before you get to the hilltop on the left. You probably recognize it. Behind there was a church pit. And that's what they were after. Charles Petrie, being from Anderson County, had a connection to his family farms in that area, knew that there was a sand pit, church pit that they used for roads. They would dig out and they would put it on roads to keep the mud and make it more all weather. And so he was hanging out the back of the car, out of the door, looking, and it was dark by this time that they were getting there. And they would say, "Is this it?" And Charles Petrie said, "Nope, this isn't it. Keep on driving." And they did that from Robertsville Crossroad, just straight up, Illinois today, but it's kind of bended around where Iroquois Avenue or Iroquois Road is now. It went behind. Evidence of that road is still there to this day. The Secret City, the Oak Ridge Civil Corps of Engineers cracked up that road so nobody would use it anymore. But that road chopped up is still there to this day. Mm-hmm. And that's where Leo York and Dennis Egort, they all figured out the location of where this murder occurred. So they have George Lewis, Andrew Crumley in this Chandler with these four guys in the back of the car heading up Illinois Avenue. And Charles Petrie said, "Stop, this is it." They get out and they start walking and they get out of the car and all of a sudden they hear from behind them, George and Andrew hear from behind them, "Stick them up, stick them up." And so they thought it was the sheriff. Oh man, the sheriff's caught us. This was illegal activity. And they start saying, and Andrew Crumley says, "Sheriff, had nothing to do with this. This is illegal. This isn't. They just told us, they hired us." And he starts going on lamenting to keep from getting arrested, right? Silence from the back. Finally, he looks over his shoulder and he sees that there's no sheriff. It's just those four guys holding, and John McClure holding a gun on them. And they just go, "You all just stay quiet," and you start walking into those woods. They were heading to the church pit. And this church pit is where they were going to tie them up and abandon them. That's all they were going to do. Gag them, tie their hands behind their back, leave them. They'll work it out. They'll get help. They won't suffer. They had no intention of doing anything else. But when they were going through, they're rifling through their pockets and everything. Charles Petrie had a flashlight. It was dark by this time. Going through their pockets, he pulls a George Lewis, a magazine. And it's the Police Gazette magazine. And you probably don't know it. I had to research it because I wanted to figure out why this testimony was in court. Because they asked the question, why did this murder occur if they were just going to steal the car and leave these guys? It was this magazine. What happened was, open the magazine. Charles Petrie's looking at this magazine in the dark with the flashlight shining on it. And that Police Gazette, it was kind of a scantily clad woman on the front. They like to sell magazines. There were police stories, crime stories in the magazine, but there was scantily clad women on the front cover. It's kind of like ESPN doing the swimsuit edition of Sports Illustrated, right? Why you do Sports Illustrated on a swimsuit edition on a Sports Illustrated magazine? Sell copy to guys, right? That's the intention. So he looked at this and he saw this scantily clad woman on it, and he said, looking down, he said, "Why, you are a sport," referring to George Lewis having this type of magazine in his possession. And thinking that that's quite a clever comment, he takes that flashlight and flashes it up to his face to share that moment of male bondage, perhaps. Let's see if he's smiling too. And he stops, and he looks at his face, and probably for the first time he's actually got a good look at George Lewis, and his smile disappeared. He studies for a minute. He says, "I do believe I know you." And George Lewis made a fatal mistake. He responded back by saying, "I do believe I know you too." And that was it. What happened was everything went silent, and he started backing out of the pit. Four guys were standing on the edge of the pit because they were just going to leave. Abandon them, tie them up, leave them. He came back, and they all said, "They know who you are." And that changed everything. Then Andrew Crumley reports that he heard them talking out that pit. There was great argument about what to do. He knew this was a serious matter. And they came back and hit both of them in the head with the pistol. They weren't going to shoot them. They decided at that point, as a group, that these guys could not survive because it was going to identify them. They took the pistol, hit them, smashed the back of their heads, hit them hard. Both went down, but that didn't kill them. And there were still more talks that, hey, look, these guys have got to be, something's got to be done. Said, we can't shoot them. That'll wake up the whole county. Because that was just echo in this ridge. So they took the pocket knife that was in the coat of George Lewis, just a little pocket knife, and they were going to slit their throats. They were already laying down on the floor of the church pit. And one of them, who no one has really fessed up, maybe there was a confession later, but at the time, we don't know who went in there. I have a good, strong suspicion who it was. Put the knee on the chest, did that across their throat. They were going to leave, and Andrew Crumley realized that that cut wasn't really deep. So he was going to play like he was dead. So if they were going to check on him, he was going to, as he called it in the press and in court, play possum. George got a little bit deeper cut that first time, and he was struggling, and he was kicking. He went silent for a while. They were leaving. And then George convulsed, made noise. They heard it, said, these guys are dead. We got to do it. You got to go back and get this done. Andrews continued to play dead. They came back in. George saw George there and gave him a double cut. So that was the gruesome part of this story. They didn't touch. They said, well, do it to that other guy. Do that to the other guy. Say, he's already dead. He's not moving. So they did not want to commit this, but they did anyway. So they left, thinking both of them were dead. George later as Andrew described it in the court, he could hear the death rattles. He knew that his friend was slowly dying. And then he heard them get into that big old Chandler 6, fired up that big boom through the county and started heading up out of the road. Andrew got up, started running away. He was gagged and handcuffed, and he was running. He needed to get out of there. He thought they were going to come back. He was running, hit a barbed wire fence, flipped over the barbed wire fence, landed up against a tree, laid there, kind of rubbed up against a tree, and then was able to rub the gag out of his mouth into his wound that helped cauterize and stop the bleeding. So that he credits that for saving his life. But as he was walking down hilltop, down what we call Illinois Avenue today, heading toward Robertsville community, he heard that big engine fire up again. Panicked, struck. He turned back and ran away from the noise, which was just in front of him. It was just the Chandler echo as they were heading toward Oliver Springs, heading toward Oakdale. They weren't coming back, but he didn't know that. He turned around, ran, hit that same barbed wire fence, and flipped over it again. So you just imagine the brutality of this to him, what he was thinking, just out of his mind. Picked himself up, recovered, started going through all the doors, knocking on doors. People wouldn't answer. What do you want? What do you want? He's been hollering murder. There's murder, murder, murder. Nobody was going to answer that door with that type of thing. What is it? You want to, hijack me, come in and, get my family, hurt me. So there was apprehension about people not answering that door. And so he continued to walk around for 2 hours in Robertsville. He went to Robertsville school where the gym is today. He saw the light on at the gym. He walked to Robertsville Baptist Church that was up just past there, and then came back down, trying to find something, and finally came near where the pool was. And that's why I was able to find it, because everybody said the murder happened near the pool. A lot of people talked about the pool as being the murder place, but it wasn't. It was just so happened they went to the crossroads there and found John Keyes who had a store there with Lockett's store, I think, right? And was able to knock on the door. And John Key, being an outstanding, well-known citizen in Robertsville, there's a book written about him, and I can't remember who wrote that book, but there's a great book written about him, about his service to the Robertsville community. But he saw Andrew there bleeding, heard his story, pulled him in, gave him first aid, gave him sanctuary, called the police, because he's probably the only one that had a phone in that area. Called the sheriff's department, and that's how everything broke loose. There was a murder up the hill, and these guys stole the taxi. They still didn't know why they stole the taxi. Andrew had no idea why they stole the taxi, but they did. Well, those four continued on to Oliver Spring, got some gas. It got some gas, probably at the same station where the Oliver Spring Historical Society is today. I think that used to be a gas station. And I think that was the station that they got gas at. That's my suspicion when I read the account. And so they continued on to Harriman, stopped at Tom Christmas's mother's house, who lived in Harriman, got some food, and then they continued on to Oakdale to be there in time for it to open up for business the next morning. So two guys stayed in the car. Otto Stevens and John McClure with the gun went to the back of the bank building in Oakdale, broke into the back window and broke into the bank and hid behind the counter. This is where it gets kind of comical, because in those bags that they brought in, those little bags that I was saying that they got from Clinton when they first loaded up into the Chandler 6, was a hat, a black mask, and a fake mustache, and they put it on. And if you can imagine how ridiculous that would have looked, that was their cover. And so they hid behind the counter, waited for that business day to open up. Well, they couldn't see the front door because they were behind the counter. That next morning, the manager comes to open up that door. Well, guess what? It's payday at the railroad yard. Every railroad man in town was behind the manager waiting for that door to open so they could cash their check and go get their goods. So you had 30 or 40 guys behind him, open the door, walks in, and he just hears, Otto and John just hear the door open. They're ready to pounce with their gun. They walk through the door. They jump up and say, stick them up. And then they see 30 or 40 people in the lobby with the manager. And so, oh, no. Wrong gun for this crowd, because you're not going to scare off any hardcore railroad guys with a 6-shooter when there's 30 or 40 of them sitting behind you. Not going to happen. They jumped out back the window that they broke into, headed up the hill where the Chandler 6 was parked. Charles Petrie, being the smallest guy, was behind the wheel. He probably couldn't barely touch the pedals, more or less drive that car. So there wasn't good thought of this. So they jumped in and start screaming out of town. They come down the hill, past the old Oakdale hotel that used to be there near the railroad yard, and start heading toward the bridge, because they're going to get the bridge and get out of town. Well, he couldn't handle that Chandler 6 power, and Charles Petrie crashed it right into the bridge and disabled it. So they're out on foot. Now, all the railroad guys and the bank manager, they're not putting up with this. They're going after the guy. They all get into their little 4-cylinder putt Ford A's, and they start going putting, trying to catch them. And these guys take off on foot, cross the bridge, get on the train tracks, and they head out of town on the train tracks. Well, what do railroad men think? They think, hey, we're railroad. Let's go get a train. We're just going to get a train and follow these guys down the tracks. And that's what they did. They got a train and just took it right down the track and spotted them at a location on Emory River called Lover's Leap. I wish I could find that. If anybody's in earshot knows where Lover's Leap on Emory River is, outside of Oakdale, let me know, let Ray know. let Keith know. I'd love to go visit that, see what this looked like, because they were over on the railroad and looked and saw them laying on the shoreline, you know, I guess getting some rest. Anyway, they saw all these guys on these cars, these flatbeds. There's probably 100 guys with guns on there. So they all split. Two of them go one way, two of them go the other way. Charles Petrie and John McClure, they really didn't know the lay of the land. So they got captured immediately. Otto Stevens, Tom Christmas, Otto's from that area, Oakdale. Tom Christmas is right in Harriman. They know this place. They start heading up toward Nemo, which is just right up the hill. You know the lay of the land. And they hid out in the cave. And they were there for a couple of weeks. Well, Charles Petrie and John McClure, they go into Harriman prison. But during this period of time, there's great unrest. And they're going to, there's a lot of unrest in the communities due to race issues. And it was happening in Knoxville in the 1990s and all over the place. So there was a fever pitch going on. And when people heard that these guys had committed this bank robbery, they were afraid that that they were going to bust into the small little Harriman jail and hang them. So that's kind of the Wild West mentality that I was talking about. You have this social, we're trying to become civilized, but we still got the rough edges of this Wild West mentality. They want to hang these guys. The murder in the pit had just been discovered. Information was starting to circulate. Hey, there's a murder, but they weren't really sure it was connected to this. So, but all of this kind of evolved. They finally connected the pieces when they talked to Andrew Crumley about the Chandler Six. They found the Chandler Six and finally connected the fact. So Sheriff Roberts, who's in the picture behind me, that gentleman right there, behind there, he knew that this jail wasn't going to house these guys. They're going to come in here and rip the doors off and hang these men. So they transported them to Knoxville in the jail because it was considered a pretty good maximum security type of jailhouse at the courthouse in downtown Knoxville. And that's where they housed them. And when they did, people all of a sudden heard about the murder that occurred in this pit in association with this bank robbery, the failed bank robbery attempt. People were not happy, but they also were intrigued. And they said thousands of people would stream into the jailhouse. They would just let them go. There was no security, and they wanted to see these guys murdered. So Knoxville turned out to witness these guys housed in the jailhouse. Finally, Otto Stevens and Tom Christmas were apprehended because of Sheriff Roberts, who was sitting back and knew that these guys would be fleshed out soon enough. He also knew they were probably being aided and abetted by Tom Christmas's brother. So he kind of just laid back. In the meantime, the 31st governor of Tennessee, Al Taylor, got involved. He heard about this huge crime because it was making national headlines, and he was hot. I want these guys apprehended. Sheriff Roberts, you get going on this. And Sheriff Roberts said, I'm going to get these guys. And he found out, said, what's Sheriff Roberts doing, by the way? Well, he's in his jailhouse sitting back. What do you mean he's sitting back? In the meantime, he sent out 500 posse members going across the countryside looking for Otto Stevens and Tom Christmas. There's huge posses. There's big awards going out. And Al Taylor, our governor of Tennessee, was right there saying, I want these men apprehended. I want somebody to get this going. And it took a while. But Sheriff Roberts knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that these guys weren't going to be living. Turned out they were living in a cave in Nemo for all those weeks. Food was running out. And the brother that was supplying all this information was getting thin. They knew they couldn't do it. And I think what they did is the brother turned him in. And Sheriff said, well, just drive them, like tell them that you're going to give them an escape and drive down this road, and I'll have my men there. And Sheriff got his men together, his deputies, with high-powered rifles. And when they came down that hill, he stopped the car, arrested them, moved them to Knoxville. Then the trial occurred in Clinton. And it was an absolute chaos scene. Thousands of people converged on Clinton. Train tickets from Knoxville and all surroundings were sold out. All cars were all rented out. Nobody had any cars to rent because everybody was converging to the courthouse so they could witness the sensational murder and attempted bank robbery court hearing case that was going to occur. People were packing into the courthouse. It could only hold a couple of hundred people. They said 300 jam pack in there. Well, this was in July, and the heat was repressive. The judge was saying, nobody can breathe in here. Open the windows, clear a path. And it was just chaotic. And finally, the judge crawled over his desk into the fray and personally cleared out a path to the window so they could breathe. It was just a carnival scene. There were cigarette girls in the hallway of the courthouse going up and down saying, cigars, cigarettes, cigars, cigarettes. Can you imagine? I'm surprised. I'm sure that they were probably selling hot dogs out on the street. There were street vendors. There were street criers. There were people playing music. Everybody was out, the whole place. They said the Clinton furniture store ran out of chairs because people were taking chairs into the courtroom and then taking them out. One report from the courthouse said, I think the courthouse is being looted. Well, that was because everybody was taking their purchased chairs home with them, so they didn't want to leave them behind for somebody else to grab them. So you just imagine this craziness. Finally, the conviction came. Andrew Crumley went online, got it in the chair, and he told what I'm telling you, all the story that occurred that night. And a lot of tears and a lot of family was there for these convicted guys were there. And they convict them to death. And so in March 1st, almost a year after the crime, these guys were transported to Nashville to the state pen in the death house for the death watch. And in March 1st, 1922, one by one, they were led down the corridor to the death chamber, and Old Smoky electrocuted them one by one. And John McClure had an attorney there from Oakdale, putting together his last will and testament. The man didn't own a thing in the world. I don't know what the will and testament was about. But he was in the chamber as these men were going one by one. They decided how are they going to execute these guys one after another. They said, well, let's get Charles Petrie first because he's wiry and he's really hyper and he'll never last for us. We'll have to drag him. So let's put him first because he's going to be too upset. So they executed him first. A couple of minutes later, they executed the second guy. They went on down. John McClure was the last one with his attorney. The attorney wrote this, and I found it in the horror scene, as he called it, in the chamber, in the jail cell, with the death chamber just right next door to it. Old Smoky had a reason for its name, and that's because it smoked badly. And that smoke billowed down the hallway where the cells were every single time somebody was electrocuted. So that's how Old Smoky got its name. And so those gentlemen were executed on that day, and that's really how the story ended. But before all of this occurred, there was a period of time where Alf Taylor, who was heavily involved, was being pressured to release these guys. They wanted, not all of them committed the murder. And so their defense was, hey, look, we were there, but there's only one guy that went into that pit and murdered them. We're not guilty of murder. And he kept on hearing family members were hammering him. This was the night before the execution. And Alf Taylor was being pressured. And finally he said, I'm going to make a statement. And the night before they were executed, he released this statement. And let me read this to you. He said, to shoot a man down is horrible. To cut his throat in cold blood is horrible. To tie man's hand behind them, then gag them, then cut their throats is unspeakable horrible. This is the crime for which 4 men stand convicted. Andrew Lewis, begging for his life, died. He got this wrong too. But George Lewis begging for his life, died, floundering in his own blood. Crumley survived to tell the awful story, quote, murder will out. That's out Teller's word. So the story that I named Murder Will Out is not my words. This is Al Taylor's words. And that's what I remember when I first put this out. Everyone said, "Oh, that's a silly title. That sounds like an Agatha Christie novel." You know, I know it may be, but Al Taylor, 31st governor of the state of Tennessee, is the one that gave me that one, and I'm going with it. So that's what happened in this particular case. That's the story, and here's a lot of particulars.
Wow, that's incredible.
Oh,
wow.
Speaking of Old Smoky,
yeah,
let me show the folks Old Smoky. Let's see if I can
have it.
I think so. Can you see it?
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so let me tell you a story. This one. This wood that's on Old Smoky is the old gallows of the penitentiary that used to be the hanging gallows in Nashville before the electric chair. They tore it down, and because they were trying to conserve money, they used the wood to construct Old Smoky. So that used to be the old gallows. So more men were executed in that wood than just what was on this electric chair. Something else. I went looking for this electric chair and found it in a museum in Washington, D.C. And I contacted them and said, hey, and I told them about the story. I said, can you send me a picture of it? Because I couldn't find a picture of it. And they said, well, we're closed. We're moving. So, well, where are you moving? And they said, well, we're moving to a place in Tennessee. I said, I'm in Tennessee. Where are you moving to? He said, well, it's called the East Crime Museum, East Tennessee Crime Museum, or Alcatraz East Crime Museum. I've got it here.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, in Pigeon Forge.
Yep.
I contacted them. They were so intrigued. They took the story and picture of Murder Will Out, and they made a plaque out of it and set it next to it. So if you go up there to the crime museum and see Old Smoky, you'll see my story, Murder Will Out by Mark Griffith, on a plaque right next to the chair.
Is that right? Yeah. Let me tell you something, and I believe I'm correct in stating this. It's been a long time, but in 1999, Errol Morris, who's a famous documentary filmmaker, he produced a film called Mr. Death: The Rise and Fall of Fred A. Lecter Jr. And Fred Lecter he's an infamous execution device designer. And his father did that as well. And I think it was his father designed Old Smoky, I believe. Now Fred, Mark?
There was two Smokies.
Okay.
There was this chair, and then they replaced it with a new one that they called Smoky.
Well, it may have been, Fred Jr. may have designed the new chair. All I know is I remember them talking about designing one that was in Tennessee in the film. But anyway, Fred Lecter, he got into trouble because he ended up being a Holocaust denier and basically ruined his life and his career because of that. But yeah, that was that just kind of brought that up. I remember that's how I got watching Mr. Death. That's how I got really into Errol Morris films and became a big fan of Errol Morris, the documentary filmmaker.
Hey, let me share my screen and show you this that was in the newspaper that I found, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
You see the cartoon?
Uh-huh. The lesson.
The lesson. Look what's in there. That's Old Smoky.
Oh.
And notice the cartoon character with the hat, the black, and the fake mustache.
Oh yeah.
that
how
was
funny.
depicted for this crime. That's what they're saying. The lesson is, and that's I found that so amusing
Yeah,
that would be part of the Knoxville story.
funny.
But the other piece to everything is my real love is to unlocking the old historic roots of where we used to travel. And part of this ebook, I have maps of the Oak Ridge of where this is from the old overview maps. And also one of my friends who helped me with this was Ron Raymond, who was he was able to take the maps of before Oak Ridge and lay them over the current map of today to show you how these roads ran. And I think that was so important. It really helps me to unlock when I'm looking for certain features that I can't seem to find, because I could not find the location of this church pit. Andrew Crumley testimony said it was 10 miles from Clinton. And but when you start to look at some things, you can't, well, how did the road run 10 miles? Where would have that been? We hit a couple spots, and Dennis Eggert, I remember saying it could be here. He goes, it could be there. And then one day they came up and said, I think we found it. And because he found somebody that was in their 90s, and I'm going to get you the name, in their 90s, had played in the sand pit when they were, maybe it was Bob Wells.
Okay.
I had a family member, mother, that played when they were a child, played in the sand pit, in that church pit, and they weren't allowed because their parents used to say, "Don't go in there, don't play. That's a murder location."
That's where the murder happened.
So that's how we backed into it. And by the way, when I figured it out, I think it was Leo York that told me, 10 miles from Clinton would have been on the city limit of Clinton toward Oak Ridge. That's where the 10-mile would have gone. And so when I drove it, although it probably the city limits location changed, but maybe just a little bit, it was exactly 10 miles up to that spot.
Wow.
So it was just it was kind of fun. It was a bunch of teamwork of doing it. My wife was a big part of it. She was deep background. I did, because of her, I was able to locate some of these people and was able to talk to some of the victim, Andrew Crumley's family. I talked to his grandson, George Lewis. I talked to their family. And I did talk to Otto Stevens' family called me. When that phone call came in, they said, "This is somebody related to Otto Stevens." Oh, I don't know.
Wow.
I was like, oh, do I really want to talk to them? I wasn't real sure. Talked to her, and she told me the history of it, but they didn't have all the facts and details, so they thanked for the story. So it's just kind of one of those things. The ebook is not just about this story. It's kind of like about some of the history of the roads and how it unlocks and the paths. Because
can you put the QR code?
yes, yeah. Hold on a
That'd
second.
be great for people.
You see it?
I say, yeah, I see it.
Oh, that's good. Right.
Now, and the only place I have to put the book is at my website on my company's site. I apologize. I don't have any other place to really put it. I don't sell it. It's not in the bookstore. Shoot that code, you should get it.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, that's good. People can get that QR code, or as you mentioned, is it on YouTube?
No, I should, but no, it is now with you guys.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
right. That's true.
Right. We're going to have it on there.
All right. Well, good deal. That sounds great. Well, Mark, we appreciate it so much. That was a fascinating story, and I'm glad I was able to finally hear the whole story instead of bits and pieces.
And because of your stories, like I said, I go back. There's another murder. I mean, it was happened at the tennis courts, and so I haven't been able to research. I haven't found anything. But somebody said that outside the tennis courts, a body was found during the Manhattan Project. But all of that information during the Manhattan Project would have been buried. I mean, so to speak.
That is true. Yeah. That is true.
Well, good luck on finding that. That'll be another good story if you can.
I searched it. I I ran out of, and I thought maybe I had to pull my old posse together, Dennis Egger, you, and you, but might not be successful.
Very
All
good.
right.
Again, thank you, Mark. We appreciate you being with us.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate you all.
Okay. Ray, what do we have coming up next time?
We have Lee Rittinger coming. Lee is a retired professor from University of Tennessee. And Lee asked me a few years ago to co-teach a class with him on the Manhattan Project over at the University of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And we agreed to do that. I told stories. He taught the course. But when we got through, I told him, I said, Lee, you've got enough information here that you could make a book about the Manhattan Project. And he said, you know, there's a connection between the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge that has not been well documented. So when Lee retired, he put together a team of folks, and about 4 of us, Al Echabus and William Bugg, who was a professor that actually hired Lee. And Al and Lee and Bill, we all got together and have put that book together. It's called Critical Connections, and there's a subtitle to it that I don't ever remember. But he's going to tell us about how that book came to be and some of the history between the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge. The book will be coming out about July of this year. We'll have some events to release the book. Mm-hmm. But he's got enough of the information about the book that I think it'll make a good hidden history episode. So we'll have Lee Rittinger next time.
All right. Well, sounds great. All right, folks. Thanks so much for being with us. And we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.